I'm Mariette Bates, and I'm the director of the Disability Studies program here at the CUNY School of Professional Studies. So I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you that are here in person. And we have a rather robust group of people that have joined us online as well. So I also want to extend a welcome to them. So some of you may not know about CUNY or the CUNY School of Professional Studies. I know that several of you in the audience are students here, but for our online folks and for people who are here who don't know about CUNY, we are a huge university with 25 campuses, about 190,000 degree-seeking students, and our school is one of the newer schools at CUNY. So we're about 15 years old. We are the only program here that is designed really for working adults. And to some extent, we're the online version of a CUNY degree programs. So we now have 11 master's programs, 15 bachelor's programs here at the CUNY School of Professional Studies. Almost all of them are delivered online. And we are now ranked #1 in New York State in terms of bachelor's programs for online degree programs, and #5 in the country, or the top 5% of the country. So I'm very proud of our work for the last 15 years of not only my own disability studies faculty, but everybody here at SBS who's made that happen. Our own program was one of the few early programs here. We started in 2004 with an advanced certificate in disability studies, and now we offer a bachelor's degree, an advanced certificate, and a Master's of Arts in Disability Studies, as well as a Master's of Science in Disability Services in higher education. So we've been growing like Topsy. What else do I want to say? We have about 200 students, and we offer about 70 courses in disability studies every year. So that we're one of the larger programs in the country. And because we're online, we have students all over the country and all over the world. So one of our students is a parent advocate who works in the UN, working on disability studies policy in Geneva. One of them is a craniofacial surgeon who works in the Congo, doing cleft palate surgery and other kinds of surgery. One of our students is a musher who lives in Alaska. And one of them is running for state senate in Florida to change disability policy. And she emailed me last week that she was 4 points up, so I hope all of you will send warm thoughts to her for November 6th, because she really, really wants to represent disability in the Florida state legislature. Our alumni are, again, all over the world. Some of them are now teaching disability studies courses in universities and colleges around the United States. They work in disability rights organizations. Some of them work in disability policy in local and state governments. And some of our alumni have gone on to study at Oxford, at Yale, and NYU Law School, and a variety of doctoral programs around the country. So we're very proud of our program and what it is doing to change disability and how people with disabilities and other folks that are marginalized are treated throughout the country. This lecture series is sponsored by many people, and over the years, our disability studies program has offered lectures with and featured speakers like Joe Strauss, who's here in the audience, Simi Linton, Leonard Davis, Tom Shakespeare, my friend Steve Taylor, who is now unfortunately deceased, and a variety of other people. So we try to enrich our program and provide this service to the CUNY and the community. But this particular series this fall has a variety of co-sponsors, which makes it all so much nicer. And I want to thank them now. They are the Futures Initiative. There's a long list, so I have to get my list to read it here. The Futures Initiative, the CUNY Graduate Center Program in Music, the Columbia University Seminar on Disability, the CUNY Disability Studies Scholars, the CUNY SPS Disability Studies Program, and the John F. Kennedy Jr. Institute on Worker Education here at SPS. I want to especially thank Heather Zeman, who has arranged these nice refreshments in this room tonight, and Darian Robinson, who is our videographer. These lectures that we're hosting here are are being recorded, and the recordings are on our YouTube channel at SPS. So if you miss something or you want to listen to it again, you can access it online. So we're also proud of that. So my co-chair of the Disability Studies Scholars Group is Julia Rodas, and because she's a friend of Melanie Yergeau, I thought that it would be great for her to introduce her because they're buddies. And so I'm going to turn the program over to Julia now. But welcome.
I actually insisted because I'm a huge fan of Melanie, and because I didn't want to mess it up, I actually wrote it down. Everybody hear me okay? In a fragment from her earlier writing, Melanie Yergeau pokes this rhetorical barb at an audience complacent with stereotypes of autism. She writes, "I do not know the product of 5,601 and 42,896. I forget how to subtract. I do not know what day of the week Mozart was born, how many children Thomas Edison had, or the cost effectiveness of deep fat fryers. I do not know the words to every Walt Whitman poem. I cannot predict the future." It is my pleasure today, though, to tell you briefly about some of the things that Professor Yergeau can do and has done. In addition to being an avid fan of the Electric Light Orchestra, #1 qualification in all things, she is Associate Professor of English at the University of Michigan, where she teaches both rhetoric and disability studies. She is the author of Authoring Autism on Rhetoric and Neurological Queerness, the book we'll be hearing about today, as well as numerous essays in digital studies, queer rhetorics, and disability studies, which can be found in Kairos, Computers and Composition Digital Press, an imprint of the Utah State University Press and University Press of Colorado. She is currently at work on a second book project already, Crypt Data. Professor Yergeau served for years on the board of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, ASAN, a nonprofit organization run for and by autistic people, as well as the board of the Autism National Committee, also known as AUTCOM. And she blogs, very productively I might add, on matters of rhetoric, autistic culture, and technology at autistics.com. This simple accounting of her professional accomplishments, though, doesn't quite do justice to the profound influence of Professor Yergeau's scholarship. The way her writing has exploded tired conventions around autistic performance and reinvented autism as neuroqueer identity, as minority rhetorical community, and as embodied scholarly agent actively inserting itself into discourses that threaten autistic ways of being. Without Professor Yergeau's work, my own research and writing would have been literally unthinkable. So, it is not only with pleasure, but also with real gratitude that I ask you all to welcome that sweet-talking woman, Melanie Yergeau, to the City University of New York.
Hello. So really quickly, I just want to note that my earrings are guitar picks that have the Electric Light Orchestra symbol. Just FYI. So, well, good evening. First, I just want to make sure can you hear me in the back? Awesome. Thank you all so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk with all of you. And I'd also, I'd like to thank Julia Rodas, Joe Strauss, Mariette Bates, Heather Zeman, and Liz Bowen, all of whom made this visit possible. Also, for accessibility purposes, I have a few large print hard copies of my talk that Julia is graciously going to pass around. I might ad-lib at a couple of points, but mostly I will be sticking to what's there if reading along is useful for you. And while Julia is passing around hard copies, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about the space that we're in and accessibility more broadly. So If at any point you find that you need to move around or move out of your chairs, or lay on the floor or roll on the floor, please do. If you need to enter or exit, use the space as you need to. Also, I just want to say that this is a vocalization and movement positive zone, so if you need to stim or vocalize, please feel free to do so as well. And I'm just going to apologize. I have rubber bands on my arms that I sometimes stim with, so I'm just going to be really conscious of the people in the first row to not hit you with them. I think I've covered the bases. So just to sort of start, I'm talking about some ideas and material that come from the later part of my books on stims and echoes and embodied movements. And as I was creating slides, I was using Google Slides and went through Google Images stockpile of stock photos. And when I typed in autism and later OCD, I kept getting Tic Tac images, as well as, I didn't use this one, but a really orderly sorting of M&Ms and Skittles that made me secretly happy. So I am happy by this image, although I'd be happier if the colors were in rows rather than all mixed together. And I'm not quite sure what flavor Tic Tacs they are. Hopefully they're not terrible ones. So here we go. So I'll go ahead and just sort of move us on to thinking about not only stims and echoes, but just for plays on words, stimitation, and then echo phenomenology. So several years ago, I found a video recording of my kindergarten graduation piled beneath a pile of Beanie Babies in my parents' garage. And I'll just make clear they were not my Beanie Babies. It remains uncertain where they emerged from. To this day, it is still a mystery. I'm going to play this video for a moment in the background as I talk. So this was a portion from my kindergarten graduation. When I watched the video some days later, I initially felt mortified. So this is me at age 5, a grainy me. This is my body, my ticking body. So I am craning my arms, and Darian graciously created some still shots of this from the video circled in relevant areas. I'm craning my arms and fingers, ritually zagging them across the visual field. My non-disabled peers are wiggly, but not like me. Our locomotive differences are pretty stark. I am swerving with the precision and rigidity of a mechanical Santa in need of WD-40. And I hesitated with that metaphor mostly because I'm afraid of mechanical Santas. Mortified, though, is perhaps the wrong word to describe my initial reaction upon seeing this video. Resonance and recognition, a kind of re-experiencing, a rekindling of my pre-diagnosis self is more accurate. For waywardness has always been the way of my body-mind. My body moves in ways I don't always fully intend. The video summoned embodied memory as much as it summoned embodied forgetfulness. So what I then knew as tics, I now know as stims or self-stimulatory behavior. Different words, even if the motions are resonant. So as I discuss in my book, resonance is what I call a neuroqueer feeling, a mode of rhetorical invention. In autistic communities, this gut feeling, what Alison Kafer calls a lust born of recognition, is at times called ADAR or UTDAR, terms that are clever plays on gaydar. So we encounter one another and we know. And I remember experiencing this resonant recognition, this UTDAR, at a social skills group some years back when a peer wiggled his fingers as he walked and a therapist censured him. And in response, he balled his fists, and my bones knew his hack, his high-cost pause button. So how to repress the stim, how to hold back the movements from view, how to release the impulse into more socially acceptable ways. So just to repeat, because I really love lingering on Alison Kafer's work, resonance is a neuroqueer feeling. an interbodily knowing and reverbing, what I might call an autistic heuristic. In their work on autistic rhetorics, autistic scholars Jason Nolan and Melanie McBride maintain that autism is embodied semiosis. So Nolan and McBride examine the ways in which autistic movements are cataloged by researchers as non-rhetorical mechanisms. So mechanisms devoid of signification or volition. And in response, Nolan and McBride turned to stimming, claiming it as, quote, an expression of embodied semiosis that communicates sensory significations otherwise pathologized within neurotypical semiotic domains, end quote. The potential significations and meanings of stimming, they note, are wide-ranging in both form and meaning or non-meaning, culminating in what they term sensory utterances. So stims might take shape as finger flicking, as full body rocking, as knitting, vocalizations, hand waving, or even banging one's head. There are many forms that stims can take. So neuroqueer resonance. I remember in particular scouring family photo albums when I was younger in search of photos where my stims were legible, and I cut out my hands. And these are some examples. So some are of hands waving in motion, a younger version of me, and others are the balled fist, where it's really evident based on the photo that I'm trying to repress or suppress whatever is going on with stimming. The potential embodied expressions of stimming really are endless. And yet, stims are often clinically differentiated from tics, often on the basis of perceived voluntariness and feasibility of suppression, as well as their purported reinforcement value. And although both tics and stims are generally conceded to be semi-voluntary, so not totally involuntary, tics are typically represented as being more involuntary than stims. Both tics and stims might manifest as urges that require completion, but tics are thought to require release at some point in time, unlike stims, which can arguably be de-escalated or redirected. So more or less, it's this involuntary continuum, with tics being seen as less voluntary and stims typically being seen as more voluntary. Degree of volition or voluntariness, however, I think is in many ways the wrong question, as is trying to demarcate what makes a tic versus what makes a stim, because the focus on voluntariness always seems to me a method for denying or partializing disabled people's rhetoricity. So just to back up for a moment, when I say rhetoricity, this bright orange word on the bottom of the slide, I'll go Vanna White style. When I say rhetoricity, I'm meaning a lot of things with that word. So I mean our presumed capacity as people, disabled or non, to communicate, to interrelate, to socialize, and to intend, essentially to understand ourselves and others. And autism is not unique among disabilities as being framed as a non-rhetorical condition. That is, autistic people are presumed to pathologically lack rhetoricity because, variously, we supposedly lack concept of self and other. We supposedly lack concept of gender. We supposedly lack concept of emotion and eros and empathy. I have a long list here of what we lack. We supposedly lack concept of not only sexual orientation, but orientatedness unto itself. So we are clinically and publicly framed as the ultimate blank slates, as personless people who are little more than skin bags with ability to parrot. And I'm just going to pull up a quote from Ole Ivor Lovaas from 1974 to demonstrate this, where he says, quote, "You see, you start pretty much from scratch when you work with an autistic child. You have a person in the physical sense. They have hair, a nose, and a mouth, but they are not people in the psychological sense. You have the raw materials, but you have to build the person." I want to note that even though this is a decades-old quote, It's one that still lingers in terms of sentiment today. And I also purposefully chose this quote because it has a staying power in autistic communities as well. So if you do a cursory visit to any autistic blog, and for instance, I'm thinking of the blogs by Amy Sequenzia, whose last name is Sequuenzia, as well as Kassiana Asasimasu, and I'm going to attempt to spell her name off the top of my head. I believe it is Asasumusu. I totally spelt that wrong, but if you Google it, it should emerge pretty close. Kassiana's blog is also called Radical Neurodivergent Speaking, which might be an easier way to find it. But I mention this because it has a staying cycle becoming almost like a meme in autistic communities to point out how little has actually changed in the ensuing decades from when Lovaas first wrote this. More or less, right, the fact that we are people as people keeps coming back to this idea of rhetoric and how we as autistic people seem to lack it. As I discuss throughout my book, rhetoric prizes, privileges, and downright cherishes intention and voluntariness. Rhetoric presumes that if one lacks bodily control or has impaired self-concept, then one cannot participate in the grander project of being human or of being with other humans. In other words, intention is a demigod and autistic people are its demi-demons. So I want Hicks and Stims to now enter again here. Does being more voluntary make one more rhetorical, right? So if the condition of being non-autistic makes one more voluntary, then does that make one more rhetorical? If I suppress a stim, have I somehow earned the magical powers of rhetoric? And this is an image of a brain that says rhetoric is magic, which I think I stole from My Little Pony. It is also captioned with stims in your nooks and crannies, because stims have to emanate from somewhere. Why must kairos or timeliness be opportune? What of the disruptive, awkward, and poorly timed stim, which, for instance, might include me firing a rubber band right now in the middle of a talk? What of the body that echoes what nobody wants to hear? I sometimes think of rhetoric as a 7-Eleven and ticks and stims as the Slurpee machine that errantly spurts frozen Coke all over the counter. So these are sticky rhetorics that convenience and sociability frantically work to scrub and contain. So years of forced suppression converge on my body as a series of competing impulses. Stimming is as painful as not stimming. Embodied denial is a routinized kind of violence, an unending form of self-governance. And yet, I keep coming back to resonance. I like thinking about body minds in terms of resonance, even if resonance sometimes means the reverbing of an ambulance siren that results in me covering my ears and shrinking into a ball. Resonance connotes a bouncing, a reverbing of modality against and between a mediating other. Disability echoes in spite of others' attempts to stifle it. In his phenomenological investigation of sound events, Casey O'Callaghan pays careful attention to the properties not only of sounds themselves, but of those objects, human and non, that mediate perception of sound. He notes, quotes, "Sounds are particular events in which a surrounding medium is disturbed or set into wave-like motion by the activities of a body or interacting bodies." So in citing O'Callaghan, I do not intend to engage in a lengthy phenomenological exercise on sound. I'm actually not even really talking about sound. Rather, my approach here is a more multimodal or multisensory engagement with echoing, or what might be termed echo phenomena in the land of the neuroqueer. According to Kewal and Podal, echo phenomena are environment-driven responses defined as quote-unquote pathological imitations of external stimuli. So in response to that quote, I decided to post a photo of a bunch of potato chips organized very soothingly according to color and brand. It is gorgeous. I did not take this photo. Google gave it to me. But nonetheless, it is great. So to go back to echo phenomena, right? The Kaiwal and Podal quote contends that echo phenomena are environment-driven responses defined as pathological imitations of external stimuli. These imitations are multiply embodied and include such motions as echolalia, which is the repetition of words and phrases, or echopraxia, which is the repetition of body movements or configurations. And on the side, I also have repetition repeated because I had to. If all of these pathological categories seem confusing, that's part of the point. Stims are repetition, tics are repetition, stims are repetition, tics are repetition. Repetition thrives on Merck, and frankly, Merck gives diagnosticians a job. So, hey, job creation. Just kidding. A deeper engagement with autistic life writing demonstrates the pernicious power that pathological categories and involuntary binaries often wield. That is, autistic people's stories show us how these ideas about our supposed non-intention or non-voluntariness can result in great harm. In one such narrative, parent Ariana Zurcher recalls a conversation with Ibby Grace, an autistic professor and activist, about mind-body disconnection and Zurcher's then preteen daughter, Emma. Zurcher had long struggled with how and whether to interpret Emma's repetitive speech. Before Emma began typing to communicate, echolalia and verbal stims served as a sort of communication bridge, but the words Emma spoke, such as city treehouse, often did not relate to any immediate context. Were Emma's echoes a matter of involuntary and neuronal disruption, or were they purposive communication? Reflecting on these echolalic moments, Zurcher writes, and this is what is up here on the slide, I was asking Ibby for her thoughts about some of the things Emma would say out loud that I found baffling. Ibby told me that I mustn't try to do a word-for-word translation, but needed to feel the emotion behind the words and try to understand the context that way. I remember being utterly confused by Ibby's explanation and suggestion, but now, today, I get it in a way I have not understood until now. In subsequent conversations with her mother, Emma confirms Ibby's suspicion that echolalia's meanings lie more in affect or anxiety than they do in the bounds of syntactic units. What's more, the question of Emma's involuntarity oversimplifies a complex, rich, and storied expression. So to go back to the example offered earlier, uttering city treehouse might be involuntary in that Emma is not specifically referencing a place, nor is she using speech to express thoughts or desires via the containers that words typically demand, but reducing her scripting or any scripting or stimming to something like involuntary delayed echolalia erases the embodied meaning of her vocal gestures. As Zurcher notes, echolalia, like other echo phenomena, often take shape as associational or perceptual signification. Echo phenomena do not symbolically represent so much as they immediately and often acontextually signify. So here's what this might mean, right? City treehouse might not directly refer to a place called City Treehouse or to a treehouse in the city. Rather, it might have meanings that are totally disconnected from how we conventionally understand those words, right? So echo phenomena queer our perceptions of referentiality, in part because even repetitions of the same phrase, gesture, or complex body movement can reference or signify entirely different things. They are, in a word, corporeal neologisms. So city treehouse might mean Emma is anxious. It might be a pleasurable phrase to utter. It might mean, as it did in this particular story by Zurcher, that Emma wishes for privacy. So city treehouse might mean none or all of these things simultaneously. And up on the screen, we have here various meanings: anxiety, pleasure, privacy, and then I added my own, which was symmetry, because I couldn't deal with an asymmetrical slide. So again, echo stims resonate. When I was a child, for instance, I had a long-running obsession with the 1980 film Airplane. And this is a screenshot from the scene where Steven Stucker compares the plane to a big Tylenol when he's asked what the plane looks like. It did look like a big Tylenol in the movie. He was accurate. I spent hours watching and rewatching the film, hoarding lines as if each were a precious metal meant for display on my mental bookshelf. While at one point I had the entire film memorized, certain lines occupied more of my attention, creeping out of my esophagus when I could not retrieve any other verbal scripts. So I quickly learned, for instance, that screaming, "There's a sale at Penny's," netted widely different reactions, dependent on rhetorical situation and interlocutor. But so too did this line function as a metonym for a complex array of feelings, stims, arguments, observations, rituals, and sometimes just general smartassery. During a middle school social studies project, I filmed myself running around a neighbor's yard, echoing the line while holding a sign with my teacher's name painted on it. She thought I was weird. Whenever I was at a mall, I'd stop dead still at an entrance and shout about Penny's, regardless of whether, in fact, the mall in question actually had a JCPenney store. I don't think that the Macy's employees liked it that much. When I was particularly upset, anxious, or even aiming to impress someone, all of which, I might add, are incredibly different categories of rhetorical and emotional response, I would often string together multiple airplane lines. So at one relative's funeral, for instance, I found myself absent of verbal thought and immediately devolved into the entirety of Steven Stucker's lines from the film. "Nick, Keith, Jared, there's a fire in the barn." I think the next one is something like, "Just like Barbara Stanwyck." I could keep going. So anyway, the inventional possibilities of echoing are many. I co-participate in the construction and destruction of rhetorical situations when responding to others' invitations to dialogue with an airplane script. "Your husband and the others are alive or unconscious, just like Gerald Ford," which I would recommend, no matter what conversation you're in, just responding with this, "just like Gerald Ford," and see what happens. It's interesting. So in their discussion of autistic social awkwardness, Jennifer Cook and Jeffrey Bird observed that, quote, "successful social interaction relies on appropriate modulation of the degree of imitation according to the demands of the social situation." So Cook and Bird's assumption of success here relies on neurotypical conceptions of socializing and rhetorical exchange. It likewise assumes that rhetorical success should always be defined socially. So, for instance, can we declare echoes as rhetorical failures when they do not seek human interlocutors to begin with? My answer to that is hell no, but other people might respond differently, right? So, more or less, this particular definition essentially assumes that interaction is only considered successful or rhetorical when it's among non-autistic or non-disabled humans. An echo can constitute its own discursive unit. And as I've been suggesting, it can also serve as a placeholder for multiple meanings. These multiple meanings might spread or shift over time, or they can fill one singular echoing act, signifying multiple meanings or feelings simultaneously and awkwardly. What I find queerly instructive from O'Callaghan's idea about echo phenomenology in particular is the notion that echoes are a kind of mediated disruption. So that is when sounds or motions or scripts emit, mediating bodies and surfaces and empty spaces muffle, warp, distort, and queer the originary emission. So I might hear an airplane line and I might repeat that very line, even matching the inflectional nuance of Steven Stucker's vocal delivery, and yet my delivery is not his delivery. and I love this one. The tower, Rapunzel, Rapunzel. If I were really to imitate him, I would have danced toward the other side of the room while shouting that. So there's something about the performance of this line, the tower, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, on my body that disrupts not only its meaning, but its affective resonance. My acontextual echoes can never duplicate or even approximate the feelings, moods, and gut checks that Stephen Stucker inspires. With echo phenomena, then, we might regard disabled body minds as scriptural queerers or queerings, transmitting multimodal signifiers that might or might not hold symbolic ties to their originating transmissions. So echoing need not immediately follow an original event in order to be properly conceived an echo. So I last watched Airplane several years ago, yet my scripting is still clinically considered echolalia. Sometimes the passage of time so distorts repetition that repetition might not even be recognized as a repeating of anything. And here I have a highly scientific slide, and by highly scientific, I mean highly unscientific, with the question of voluntariness, right? So on one side, on the involuntary side of the continuum, we're typically seeing echoes as being involuntary in some regard, or semi-voluntary. And then on the other side, we have social non-echoey stuff, which is, again, a very highly scientific category. Come join rhetoric. So I think about my kindergarten graduation here, just to sort of circle back to the passage of time and to the eventness of my body and what my fingers mean or what my fingers don't mean. I think about my balled fists and all of their resonance. I think about the rubber bands that I line on my wrist, the snapping velocity of rubber against skin, redirecting the impulse to my hands, to creating purposeful pain, to creating forgetful pain. Is this voluntary? Is this decorous? Where is my body echoing, and where is it echoed? Thank you. And I'm going to, as people ask questions, I'm going to repeat them just for the webinar folks. So apologies if I misconstrue what people are asking. So the question was the tension between stimming and social acceptance. So on the one hand, it's seeing stimming as a cultural, a positive, autistic form of engaging with the world. On the other hand, we live in a world that is not so accepting of stimming and what stimming represents. Is that, did I get the question? Yes. Right. Okay, so it's stimming, but also thinking about autism in general. Yeah. So I'm going to attempt to get started in a response to that question. I realize like the depth and gravity of the question means I won't be able to fully, but my hope is that it'll kind of carry more back and forth in conversation. So first I might just start saying that, or even recommending. So there's really a thriving autistic culture movement that exists in a variety of places. So some of those places are online. Sometimes they're in-person gatherings. They more or less, what I find important to turn to them to, and things that have also helped me grow as an autistic person is starting to accept the idea that autism is a core part of who you are. And so part of that is trying to reconcile stimming. And I should say that in this talk today, and one of the things I didn't get to that's also in my book is that stimming isn't always positively experienced by the autistic person. Sometimes that's related to the social stigmas that autistic people face, and sometimes it's because certain stims can be painful. So for instance, if one of your stims involves like hitting yourself and it's not something you purposefully want to do, how do you reconcile that, right? But I think a broader part of this is the recognition that many and most stims and these embodied movements aren't harmful, and that the only harm that emerges really is from people who aren't accepting. And so then we're kind of confronted with two scenarios. work to make a world that's more accepting, or try to make the autistic person conform in a way that will be more palatable. And what we've seen time and time again is that trying to socially conform comes at great cost to the autistic person, just emotionally, personally, in all variety of things. So I think, you know, a couple of places I might recommend people turn to read a bit more about this. One is, I don't know that she's updated it recently, but Julia Bascom, Bascom, runs a blog that's called Just Stimming. And she also recently published a children's book. It's an illustrated version of a piece that first appeared on her blog called The Obsessive Joy of Autism. And I really love the way that she describes stimming. And I'm going to get it wrong off the cuff, but like there's this one line where she basically describes herself as sparkling. That's how she feels when she stims. And I will say, like, again, a lot of these stories become really important in autistic spaces because they're a form of validation and acceptance, but also recognition. This is the case for, I think, a lot of disabled people where when we're younger, we don't necessarily encounter other people like us. We're placed in schooling or residential situations that are meant to try and keep the disability at arm's length or at bay. And so we're not engaging with our fellow disabled peers. And so we reach a point that when we do finally meet people who share experiences with us, that I keep coming back to that resonance or recognition idea, where there's suddenly this like lifting of a veil of relief in some ways because there's an explanation, there's a community, there's a culture. So I think that's my long-winded way of saying that I think part of this also involves carefully curating opportunities to be part of those communities and to have access to autistic peers and autistic mentors and autistic elders, which, depending on where you're from, assuming everybody is from this area, I would hope that there might be more opportunities than if you were coming from a more rural region. So I'm going to attempt to restate for the webinar. So catch me where I'm wrong, but like more or less the question and discussion is around like ideas of volition, free will, and voluntariness being at the heart of a lot of questions concerning disability, illness, self-help, health in general, and that there's this like illusion that if one has free will or agency or enough voluntariness, then they can kind of conform, like conformity being tied to those questions of agency. And I'm trying to think of I feel like the way that you addressed that was so powerful with different examples in terms of even questions concerning what's a problem, what's a disability, and that relationship. And for the webinar folks, the example given was an autistic daughter not claiming that her problem in a given context was autism, but that rather she and a friend she just met both liked Arthur and were too old to like Arthur. Okay, so that's the recap. So more or less, I feel like this is, okay, I did an okay job. Awesome, okay. So I mean, I think this was something I just keep finding. It's not limited to autism. Like I feel like in some ways autism is like a representation or a meta disability or a trope for things that are phenomena that are occurring in other spaces, not only in terms of other disability communities, but other communities writ large. And what I keep finding over and over again is this idea that voluntariness is a scale and that voluntariness is that which we value. And so, you know, the idea really quickly became for me, because where autistic people are claimed to be impaired in so many domains that connect back to intention or agency. So among them would be, I mean, I talked about stimming and echoing this evening, but it would also be things like empathy, social interaction and basic goal direction, recognition that one is a self and that others are unique selves. It also goes back to imagination, being one of the original triad of impairments. Anything involving communication, and we can kind of keep going on and see how intent is often mapped onto these things in different ways, but still mapped onto it. So one of the things that often comes up for me, like just to go back to the voluntary question, is I've been disclosing very publicly that I'm autistic for a while now. I didn't always, and that carries a lot of risk with it, whether you do or don't. But often when I ask myself why I'm disclosing in a particular situation, I'm questioning what not only my intention there is, but how other people interpret it. So for instance, if I just have a meltdown and I explain it as, I'm sorry, I'm autistic, it's suddenly like I'm almost admitting I lack voluntariness, right? As a way to make another person understand. And in many ways, that is exactly it, because I can't fully control when that's going to happen. I mean, sometimes I can hold it in until I get into a closet or a bathroom or something, but it's not within my control totally. But then how then is somebody going to interpret that lack of voluntariness, right? Because suddenly it means that they have more agency, they have more communicative capacity, they have more control over their person. And these are all things that, because I'm a rhetorician, I always come back to rhetoric. It's just inevitably what I do, but they're key tenets of it. And the reason rhetoric is so important is it's about theories of how we communicate as humans, essentially, right? Like, it's just very integral to how we conceptualize ourselves. Julia, and then...
You said you're a rhetorician. I'm interested in rhetoric. And this is a hard question in disability studies, and I think autism studies in general, about embodiment. So your own book and this talk begins with your body and the rhetoric of your body speaking. You're totally grounded in that body-mind idea. But I want to ask about the possibly overdetermined place of the body in autism and in disability studies, especially when we're talking about autism, because so frequently autistic people or autism is represented as being silent or non-communicative or without rhetoric. So it's perceived culturally as kind of being all body, no self. And in disability studies, there's been this movement to really ground stuff in the body, make people remember that you're talking always about people. And I'm wondering what you think about gestures that move away from the body and start to exist purely in the space of rhetoric, as though there were no body. And whether there's really room for that, or whether it's a dangerous place to go.
I'm going to try to answer that. I think I might unpack it in a couple of ways. It's such a common motif to essentially conceptualize autistic people as like, I'm thinking back to, this was Simon Baron-Cohen's Mind Blindness, and in the early pages he was citing an Alison Gopnik anecdote where she basically said autistic people are like fleshy skin bags who see other people as fleshy skin bags. And then there's another book by John Horgan where it had, when I say my favorite quote, I mean the opposite of my favorite quote, where he essentially said that autistic people basically couldn't differentiate other humans from furniture. So I refer to him as a chaise lounge because I can't differentiate him from other humans. It's just so like that whole motif that there's nothing in there. Or I'm thinking back to the seminar that Julia and Joe led earlier today with the metaphor of autistic people being trapped or imprisoned, being walled off by a fortress. So either there's no one in there or there's someone trapped in there in the body who then needs to be freed. I think one of the things I keep coming back to is one, the way that the body and mind disconnect operates still, even within disability studies. And I'm really grateful for people like Margaret Price, who are really continuing to do that hard work to unpack and really trouble that dichotomy. And I think one of the ways in which autism often becomes legible is either, it's interesting, it's either through embodied performance or through the absence of embodied performance. So it's like this weird kind of duality. So it's either through silence and not performing, or it's through like overperforming and loudness if we're thinking about autism tropes and autism diagnosis. Where I might kind of land on and then go to the next question is just one thing that we haven't talked about is theory of mind as an organizing theory or concept of autism, which is essentially the basic idea is that autistic people don't have, or if they do have a theory of mind, it's an impaired theory of mind. And theory of mind is the capacity to recognize that other people have their own unique thoughts, mental states, feelings, etc. It also involves recognizing that you have your own unique thoughts, mental feelings, etc. So it's essentially recognizing that other people have their own feelings separate from yours and that you are a self. And I could ramble on this for quite a while in terms of why this is a really damaging understanding of autistic people as well as an inaccurate one, because it essentially creates this notion that theory of mind is a cognitive capacity based on the fact that autistic people don't have this capacity. So it's circular logic. So we know that non-autistic people have a theory of mind because autistic people don't have one, is sort of like a way to frame that research. But the very idea, right, like this notion that it goes back to, Julia, what you're saying in terms of nothing being there, it's framing autistic people cognitively as not really being people, in part because they don't have the capacity to recognize other people as people. Oh, yeah. So the question from online was, what do you think of people who suggest less stimming or using distractions to curb or prevent stimming? I think, like anything, I want to say that, I mean, stimming is contextual, even though I just gave a talk talking about how it's not always contextual. But more or less, I think it comes back to thinking about how is stimming serving the person, right? Like, is stimming a pleasurable experience? Is it a compensating mechanism? And a lot of people narrate that stimming actually helps them to remain present in a space. It's actually a form of creating access in an accessible space. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by the environment, then turning to stimming is actually a way of remaining present in that environment. Stimming can also, as I mentioned a second ago, it can be pleasurable in the sense that it feels nice. It's something that bodies do, and it's actually something that everyone, whether or not you're autistic, does. And I'm looking around, like, there are people knitting, fidgeting with hair and pens, rocking back and forth, knocking their feet. Like, these are all stims. It's just that only certain stims are designated as being pathological because, quote unquote, pathological people are doing it. What I would say is that I wouldn't say universally that one should encourage stimming, because, again, like, maybe stimming is causing someone great distress and trying to figure out the root of that distress. Or is there a way to use stimming that actually works for the person? So I think often when we're talking about curbing stimming, it's usually around social appearance rather than how is it benefiting or affecting the person who's stimming. Yeah. So I'm just going to repeat the question. So more or less, the question was around why is it that autistic people aren't listened to or believed? You know, even when autistic people are making their needs known very clearly and transparently. And I think that there's a lot of reasons why this is the case. And I'm going to, in some ways, turn back to my rhetoric hat again, because this is actually a big part of rhetoric, ethos. So how does one foster or cultivate a sense of character or credibility when interacting with others? And more or less, autistic people are basically presumed not to have ethos. And Janelle Johnson, who's a rhetoric scholar, calls this CACO ethos, and it's spelled KAKOETHOS. And it literally means anti-ethos. And she's talking about this in reference to mental illness in particular. But it bears thinking about, I think, across disability more broadly. more or less when you're autistic, and you're presumed not to have capacity in a lot of ways. Like, you're not presumed to be credible, you're not presumed to be of sound character, and so it means, rather unfortunately, that as autistic people we face barriers and discrimination in a lot of situations. People just don't believe us. I can remember I was part of a social skills group for a really long time. And I'm going back to thinking about when I was a grad student attending this group. We went on an outing to see the movie Adam. I don't know if anybody has seen this. And basically, so it was a bunch of us autistic folks and a few social workers going to this movie. And afterward, we had a discussion of the movie. And me and one other autistic person, we were both English majors, had some critiques. And the social workers were getting angry at us like we were poisoning all of the other autistic people with our ideas about critiquing this movie. And our critiques weren't just about the autism representation, but things like, there was literally no plot. Like, there just wasn't a plot to this movie. Like, he's autistic, she's not. Her dad is on trial for something, but that never really goes anywhere, and that trial was more interesting than their romance. And, like, you know, anyway, but we just weren't believed. And, like, even when we were appealing to the fact, like, we're graduate students in English, like, this is what we do, like, we're hoping to get careers in this, it didn't matter. The fact was that we were autistic, and they were literally reading it as a symptom, like, well, you're just acting out, you're having an outburst. And, you know, I guess my friend was having an outburst by that point, but I was ready to join him. So, yeah, so I'm going to try to repeat that question as best as I can. So the question was thinking about that sense of self-embody that comes when you're autistic and you begin recognizing being autistic in a cultural sense and what stims mean, but also how that connects to dysphoria and also connects to thinking about trans and genderqueer identity and more broadly, and how, like, typically being autistic and being trans are conceived as separate things when really there's actually a lot of overlap and commonality. Yeah. So I think more or less, just based on my experience identifying both as autistic as well as queer, and reading the life writing of autistic people who identify as autistic and as queer, is to say that there's such a high degree of overlap, and that often if you identify as trans or as queer, it's seen as a symptom of autism rather than as actually being a vital part of one's identity and sense of self. So it also becomes particularly pertinent, I think, when we're talking about identifying as genderqueer, in the sense that if you even look at really awful pathological literature on trans life, it typically, clinical literature will talk about trans identity in terms of developmental milestones that eerily mimics and mirrors some of the stuff that's going on with autism in terms of pathological writing. And so more or less, like, developing a sense of gender is considered a developmental milestone. And so when you're starting to think about developmentalism as a discourse, there's a high degree of overlap. And then suddenly you're working with an autistic person who is claiming very proudly a queer or a genderqueer identity, and it's just brushed off. It is really, really, unfortunately common. I will say that you know, a lot of the work that's being done, especially within and around the neuroqueer movement, is really trying to press upon this and make this known as a really important and emerging site of activism that desperately needs work, because people are being denied access to services that they rightfully need and deserve based on the fact that they have an autism diagnosis, which is often seen as disqualifying. Yeah, so the question more or less was thinking about stimming and whether or not to actually stim or to try to hold back stims, and how when around neurotypicals, stimming generally isn't socially accepted. So how do we then kind of move forward from that or overcome that? So I think maybe one thing I want to also say is I think that this kind of work involves all of us, whether or not we're autistic or whether or not we're disabled. Part of it is, I think, or both, right? Yeah, I mean, part of it is really coming to see stims as a vital part of how we interact with each other and communicate and just be and exist in the world. And also recognizing that a lot of autistic people feel shame around it, especially when like it's reaching a point where you know you can't control it, or you know that you just need to engage in it, and you can sense the other reactions of people around you or become hyper vigilant about it. It also, I think, speaks to the need to have more autistic spaces, and also from very young ages on for people to think really intently about what they're doing when they try to suppress their children's or their clients or their students' stims. Because I know, for me personally, I still stim, but like I've developed these tricks to make it stop, and it gets to a point where I'm no longer sure what's more comfortable for me because it's all anxiety now. It's like it took something core away from me, you know, like whereas like before I was able to recognize because other people like, you know, trained it out of me or pointed it out all of the time. Before I was trained to recognize that it was quote unquote unusual or aberrant, it was fine, it was great. But now that I know, it's always tainted. So like Julia Bascom, I'm just going to point out her blog again, has another really well-known blog post called Quiet Hands that talks about like the violence of stopping people from stimming. And quiet hands more or less means to stop stimming, and it's a frequently used phrase. And in her case, she was forced to put her hands on sticky tack as a child, including when she had a broken arm. Other times, I know for me, it was always sit on your hands. So that's what I typically do frequently. And in a lot of ways, like when I wear rubber bands, it's to stop other stims from happening. So it's still stimming, but it's like a more socially acceptable stimming. So thinking about, I mean, part of it's also observing how it is we're all redirected and trained out of things, right? So again, like I think stimming is, as you're saying, like it's a really good representative issue in some ways about how normalization happens. Yeah, and so just to recap so that the people online can hear, so the comment was essentially that a lot of autistic people don't know the services that might be available to them or might not know how to pursue them. And so this can also be another kind of roadblock too, especially when we're talking about like the importance of autistic people not only finding each other, but receiving what they might also need. Okay, I'm going to try to, I wish I'd handed you the microphone because I'm not going to state it as eloquently as you just did. So the comment in question was about stimming's relationship to capitalism, meaning that like quiet hands becomes really important or emblematic in a capitalist context because stimming hands aren't working hands, but quiet hands are presumably working hands. And so what connections might there be between stimming and capitalism essentially? I would echo that and say yes. I mean, I think that in a major way, and I even think about like I think about sheltered workshops, for example, right? And like how that's like weirdly tied to capitalism, but also in a way that's really exploiting disabled people, paying them sub-minimum wage. And again, like stimming wouldn't be acceptable in that context. Or if people stim, then it means that their value is reduced, right? So like more or less in sheltered workshops, what you earn is connected to how disabled or non-disabled you are. So your productivity is actually like defined against a metric. It also makes me think about functioning binaries because functioning, like low functioning, high functioning, are very much neoliberal capitalist ideas. More or less, even if you're deemed high functioning, you're still presumed not functioning enough to work. Like these are very much ideas connected to labor. Yeah, so to recap the question, the question was, what would you want teachers of autistic kids to know / what would you have wanted to know growing up? And also the anecdote behind the question also was working at a school for the deaf that also has autistic students as well. On that vein, I just, in case you haven't seen her blog, E. Ashkenazi, her last name is Ashkenazy. She runs a blog called Aspitude, It's ASPITUDE. And I don't know that she's updated it in a while. She also was a co-editor along with Lydia Brown and Morenike Onaiwu, Morenikeonaiwu. Hopefully I'm spelling everyone's names right. Anyway, Ashkenazi is both autistic and deaf. And the theme of her blog, more or less, has been to interview other autistic people, some of whom are also autistic and deaf. Not everyone she interviews is, but it's really, really useful as a blog, and she's also such a wonderful writer. What I would say, so going back to the broader educational question, I mean, I think it comes back to maybe even what I was just suggesting with the blogs, like reading what other autistic people have written, thinking really broadly too about what constitutes autistic writing. So I think thinking across modality, seeking out autistic people who might be vlogging on YouTube, looking at autistic memoirs and blogs and even social media. There's a lot of work in writing and communicating from non-speaking as well as speaking autistic folks in those venues. So I think another thing related to that a lot of autistic adults voice in those forums is wishing that when they were younger, they had access to people who were like them. So I think it connects back.